Hello, everyone. This is the problem when you're last. All the great comments have already been made, so I'll try and fill in a few blanks. Welcome, everyone. Glad to meet you all. Welcome to the halls of early Canadian capitalism. It's quite interesting to think, this is kind of where Canadian business began, and I know the battles that many had, particularly on the union side, in trying to organize workers with many of the individuals here having your battles against them over time. But, I think about this place and I think about what happened at that time, and, Labour did organize in Canada with these entrepreneurs, and a relationship was established in Canada between businesses, labor, with these entrepreneurs. And I look today at the world of capitalism and the fact that many of our workers are not represented by anyone, and many of our workers, because of globalization, have lost their jobs, never to find those jobs again. This is why the Donald Trumps of the world have been able to tap into something, the Brexit have been able to tap into something that we've never seen before. Maybe we need to go back to the hallmarks of these entrepreneurs to at least ensure that some of that relationship between labor and business is reestablished, because we have a huge gap in the world, I think, as we look ahead. But Wolfgang has been a tremendous, of course, as we all know, a tremendous advocate for certain workers who, over the years, have suffered an injury and has not been able to work, and therefore, what can we do to support them? So I'm truly honored to be here today to formally recognize Wolfgang, and of course the National Institute for Disability Management and Research, for which Wolfgang, as you've already heard, was the driving force in its creation. We're here to celebrate, and we've heard a lot already about NIDMAR and Wolfgang, but we're here to celebrate Wolfgang and NIDMAR in reducing the human, social and economic costs of disability of workers, to workers and employers, by creating new and innovative tools, which he has done working with NIDMAR, and we've heard about those tools today, to foster that greater integration of disabled workers back into the workplace. And I think that's a tremendous accomplishment over the past 25 years that Wolfgang and NIDMAR can be so proud of. I first met Wolfgang about 15 years ago, shortly after I became the Deputy Minister of Human Resource Development Canada. Now, that department has changed its name about 4 times since then, and I don't know what the heck they call it now. I'm retired, I don't need to know. But HRDC at that time, and I think still is in its new name, HRDC was responsible for the design and delivery of most of the government's large social programs, and these included, of course, federal programs to support Canadians with disabilities. So at the suggestion of my brother, who was a deputy in the BC government at the time, my brother Gary, and he knew Wolfgang and worked with Wolfgang, he suggested that perhaps I should meet with this guy, because he has some very interesting ideas about how to deal with disabled Canadians in the workplace. And I have to say, my brother Gary thought I should meet with him for another reason, because just shortly before that, I was dealing with a workplace injury, a very personal workplace injury, and that in my previous department, which I just left, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, when you become a deputy in the federal system, you're fortunate enough to get a driver. And so I had a driver. It was a great thing, and my driver, his name was Giovanni Lappa. And Giovanni had driven Brian Mulroney. Before he became Prime Minister, he had been a driver for many years in the federal system. And he became my driver. And I don't know, your driver becomes part of your family, because they're the first to pick you up in the morning, they're last to let you out at night. They are there sometime to take your kid to school. So they become a part of really your very close inner family and friends. Well, my driver, Giovanni, one day was up cleaning his roof, and he stepped on the ladder slipped away, and he fell on his back, and Giovanni never walked again. And so I thought, okay, Giovanni's in the hospital, we got the prognosis, he's going to be disabled for the rest of his life, but hey, I'm the deputy minister. There's no problem here. I'm just going to go back to the department, see what we need to do for Giovanni. How do we get him back into the workforce? There was nobody. There was nobody for me to talk to. There's my HR person. But in our system, when you went on disability benefits, you were even being, the disability checks came from the Treasury Board. You even basically left the department. We had no way to reintegrate. We didn't even not know what to do to integrate Giovanni back into the federal public service. So that's why I thought I should meet this guy, Wolfgang, because I heard he had some ideas, as my brother had outlined. So I'll never forget my first impression of Wolfgang when this burly man came into my office, reached out and shook my hand. I swore that he almost took my hand off. And that, it's a kind of a guy thing, but I said, I guess I just didn't get my hand in right, so I'm going to make sure I do that the next time. Friends, over the last 15 years, I have never got my hand in right in greeting Wolfgang. He's almost taken it off each and every time. But I was always very impressed from those very early days of Wolfgang's enthusiasm and his determination in promoting what was a relatively kind of new idea, a new concept. And as noted, bringing different ideas from many different areas together in this whole concept of disability management. Reintegrating a disabled worker back into the workplace, as we all know, was not only tremendously beneficial for the individual's personal and economic well-being, but it just made good business and economic sense as well. And as an economist by training, I could clearly relate to these ideas, and the Giovanni experience was so fresh in my mind of my colleague sitting at home, not knowing what to do for the rest of his life. And that, I think, began our long-lasting relationship that we've had to this day. And we met regularly in my office at HRDC, and then he continued to come to my office when I became Secretary of the Treasury Board, and then to my final assignment as Clerk of the Privy Council and Head of the Public Service. Now, Wolfgang's meetings took a lot of planning, not only for me, but actually for my whole office staff. Because normally our meetings were scheduled for about an hour. Now, Wolfgang's enthusiasm for his projects and his initiatives and the work he was doing around the world often resulted in our discussions going well past the scheduled time. So my staff, of course, as being good staff as they are, and I had usually many meetings throughout the day, began to introduce what I would call new and innovative ways to try to get Wolfgang out of my office at the scheduled time. First, they simply reduced the time. They said I had available to meet with Wolfgang. Well, if you know Wolfgang, if you all know them, my friends, time means absolutely nothing to him. The scheduled time came and went, and the meetings went on. So my staff resorted to Plan B. You probably all have heard this one. After a few minutes prior to the scheduled end of our session, one of my staffers would come into the office, hand me a note, all pre-planned, hand me a note and watch over me as I read it. My line was to be, something important has come up, Wolfgang. We're going to have to end this meeting. Generally, Wolfgang would respond, I fully understand. So let me conclude with my final 3 points. He only had 3 points. And as always, the meetings went on to their natural conclusion. So when I became clerk, my staff came up with a penultimate strategy to end our meetings on time. Again, near the scheduled end, and this actually did happen. Near the scheduled end of the meeting, my poor staffer would open the door, poke her head in, and state matter-of-factly that the Prime Minister needed to see me right away. That did go some way in shutting down the meeting on time. Now, look, I have to admit that, in fact, part of the problem was me. You see, I'm now head of the Public Service of Canada. Giovanni's still at home. This is still a number of years later. And I had over 250,000 public servants where matters of workplace health and disability management were crucial to the well-being of our workforce. And it was as a result of my meetings and my questions, my meetings with Wolfgang and all the questions I asked, that I began to realize how little we were doing as Canada's largest employer to promote workplace well-being and to ensure that departments had the necessary tools to help reintegrate our disabled back into the workplace, into the federal public service workplace. He was my catalyst. It was through our conversations and his insights that I began to pose the questions to the HR people and departments, and particularly to all those deputies who reported to me, on what we can do to make the public service environment better for all our employees. And it was through these conversations throughout the public service that we began to realize that we do not even know the magnitude of the problems we are facing. Since each department managed their own workforce, we had no idea how many public servants were away off sick or on short-term disability or long-term disability. So when I became secretary to the Treasury Board, we began to gather this data to put some definition to our challenges, and the story was not a pretty one. We estimated in any given day we had over 18,000 public servants absent from work, which amounted to about 7% of the workforce, far greater than private sector numbers, some of the largest numbers in terms of people absent. Many were sick, but many were on disability, long-term disability. So clearly, the data spoke for itself. We uncovered a human resource management issue too big to ignore, and Wolfgang, without those overextended meetings, I don't know, as I said, if I ever would have posed the questions that needed to be answered. I'm glad to report that after too many years of inaction, measures are now being taken to reduce the rate of absenteeism in the federal public service. Over the past several years, departments have established workplace health and well-being centers, many of which have adopted return-to-work policies and practices. At the same time, the current government, I know, has been trying to reach a new collective agreement with the bargaining agents where workplace health is a key focus of deliberations. I know we should be using NIDMAR's audit more than we have. There are other tools that are there, but at least we're moving in the right direction, and hopefully one day our numbers will be somewhat more representative of what's happening in the rest of Canada and in many countries around the world, like Germany. So I guess for me, Wolfgang, I need to thank you for all your wise counsel and advice to me. And I know you weren't thinking it, you were giving me counsel and advice as you talked about what you were doing through NIDMAR, but you were. And I think the Public Service of Canada also owes you a great deal of gratitude. Finally, I want to congratulate NIDMAR, and in particular Wolfgang, who had the foresight, commitment, and may I say tenacity, to create Pacific Coast University for Workplace Health Sciences. PCU is the only academic institution in the world that is fully dedicated to advancing cutting-edge research in all matters related to workplace health. I'm truly honored to be able to serve as the university's first chancellor, though I know we've got a few years before we have our first convocation, but we're well on our way to that. But again, I remember, it was like yesterday when Wolfgang proclaimed to me at one of those meetings that he wanted to create a university to promote workplace health. And my reaction was, sure, why not? And I thought to myself, has this guy gone off his rocker? Well, here it is. It took a few short years for his vision to become a reality. He got the NIDMAR board to endorse this, and several months later, the founding legislation received unanimous consent by all members of the British Columbia legislature. I did try and provide some support along the way when I suggested they should apply for federal funding from a new federal university infrastructure program that was set up during the 2009 recession. They applied and qualified for the grant, all above board, I may say. And this funding, combined with provincial and federal and private sector support, has allowed for the construction of a small university building in Port Alberni, BC, and other infrastructure to allow this university now to get off the ground. I think it's a tremendous, tremendous accomplishment, and hopefully through the university, we will promote workplace health science more than we've ever seen before. So I'm very excited and enthusiastic to be the chancellor. So again, another tremendous accomplishment for NIDMAR and Wolfgang. You know, one of the greatest basketball players who ever played the game, Michael Jordan, once said, very simple statement, always turn a negative situation into a positive situation. Wolfgang, this is the motto you have lived by. You took a terribly negative event in your life that led to your physical disability and decided to do good deeds by becoming a tireless advocate of labor management workplace reintegration. As one of the original founders of NIDMAR, you have helped create codes of practice for disability management, the audit tools, the standards, the certification standards for return to work coordinators and disability management professionals that are now used, as noted already, around the world. And as I've already mentioned, you've helped create a new university. You're a great Canadian. I'm proud to call you my friend. Thank you.